Turkey's president criticizes the conflicting messages coming from the Trump administration over its plans to pull out troops from Syria. National Security Advisor John Bolton has been seeking reassurance on Kurdish fighters, but Turkey warns it won't compromise. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly by Thibault. Many were caught off guard last month when U.S. President Donald Trump announced he would pull American troops out of Syria immediately. But since then, his administration has sent conflicting messages about how and when that withdrawal will take place. His National Security Advisor John Bolton has been in Turkey to seek protection for U.S.-backed Kurdish fighters in Syria who have been a major part of the battle against ISIL. But Turkey sees them as terrorists, and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has warned he won't compromise on the Kurdish issue. We'll bring in our guests in just a moment, but first here's more of what the Turkish president had to say.
Bolton has made a serious mistake, and whoever thinks like this has also made a mistake. It's not possible for us to make compromises. Those who are part of the terror corridor in Syria will face the necessary lesson. There is no single difference between the PKK, the YPG, the PYD and ISIL. Despite reaching a clear understanding with Mr. Trump, different voices have started to emerge from different segments of the administration. But Trump's views on Syria and his decision to withdraw remains our point of reference.
Well, Erdogan was addressing members of his ruling AK party there. Earlier, in an opinion piece for the New York Times, his tone was more measured. He praised Donald Trump's decision to pull troops out of Syria, but added that the United States withdrawal must be planned carefully and performed in cooperation with the right partners to protect the interests of the United States, the international community, and the Syrian people. Turkey, he said, which has NATO's second largest standing army, is the only country with the power and commitment to perform that task. The first step is to create a stabilization force. Only a diverse body can serve all Syrian citizens. And he adds, in this sense, I would like to point out that we have no argument with the Syrian Kurds. Here's Al Jazeera's Jamal El-Shayal with more now from Ankara.
Despite the public statements made by both the American side and the Turkish side that Bolton's discussions with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's senior advisor Ibrahim Kalin here in Ankara were productive, it would seem in reality they weren't as productive as they would like people to believe. Prior to this much anticipated meeting, it was announced that there would be a joint press conference held by both the Turkish and the American side. At the 11th hour, that press conference was cancelled. When I asked the advisor to President Erdogan, Dr. Kalin, why that was, he said it was at the request of Bolton, who said that he needed to get back to Washington quickly to deal with the border security issue, the war with Mexico, and the standoff taking place in D.C. Not necessarily the most convincing of arguments when you think of what's at stake here, American military presence inside Syria, as well as the greater issue of what to do with Syria moving forward. Now, what is the main point of contention? As far as the Turks are concerned, they want to continue what they say cleansing out that eastern side of Syria from what they describe as terrorist organizations. They've already had quite significant success in the push against ISIL. For example, they've cleared Jarablus, Al-Bab and other surrounding areas from that group. However, they say ISIL is not the only terrorist organization. There is the YPG, that's the Kurdish militia group affiliated with the PKK that's been attacking Turkish cities, security forces, police officers inside Turkey for the best part of several decades. The Americans, however, do not consider the YPG as terrorists. They consider them as partners. They've been funding them, arming them in the fight against ISIL. And that's why after President Trump had initially said that there would be a full, quick, swift withdrawal of American troops from Syria, suddenly the Pentagon and other security establishments in the US said, well, hold on, maybe that's not the wisest thing. The Turks say that they are not going to target Kurdish civilians, that in fact in previous years and throughout history they've actually welcomed Kurdish refugees. They've cited, for example, Erdogan did this in parliament earlier when they brought in Kurdish refugees after Saddam Hussein had used chemical weapons against them in northern Iraq, and that their fight is only against what they describe as terrorist organizations. The Americans, because of obviously other regional implications and impacts on it, they view that they need some sort of guarantee with regards to what Turkey will do. Jamal El-Shayal for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests now. In Istanbul, Osman Sert, Research Director at the Ankara Institute and a former advisor to Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu. In Washington, D.C., Nicholas Danforth, a fellow for the Bipartisan Policy Center's National Security Program. And here in Doha, we have Marwan Kabalan, Director of Policy Analysis at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. Thank you all for joining us on Inside Story. Osman Sert, in Istanbul, if I can start with you, the Turkish president criticizing the conflicting messages coming from the Trump administration as far as its plan to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. Erdogan says preparations are almost done for an operation against what he called terrorist groups in Syria. Will he proceed without coordinating with the Americans? Will Turkey go it alone?
Ibrahim Kalın just put it during the press conference very clearly that we will inform the Americans what we'll be doing, but we won't request a permission from the Americans. Yes, Turkey can do something, but of course, till the last moment, I think Ankara will be trying to seek the cooperation of the Americans. But Turkey already put it very clearly and boldly that the PYD is a terrorist organization, is a threat for it, and it can proceed unilaterally, but of course with coordination and at least just notifying the Americans what it will be doing.
There's a lot of frustration from the Turks, Osman, it seems, towards the United States and its plan to withdraw its troops from Syria. What precisely is Turkey and is Erdogan looking for from the Trump administration at this moment?
Look, the disappointment has two faults. One, there is always some shaky and conflicting messages from the Washington, D.C. Okay, first, President Trump was telling that he is withdrawing the American troops immediately, and then there are so conflicting messages. The American troops should stay there. Mr. Bolton was telling that, speaking about weeks, months, maybe years, and that's why Turkey, first of all, want to understand what really the American administration wants. This is important, and this is creating a disappointment. And secondly, the Americans are putting Syrian Kurds, but it's PYD indeed, not the Syrian Kurds generally. President Erdogan put in New York Times article as well, in front of Turkey, which is a NATO ally, which is so many strategical partnership with the Americans, and it is telling that, giving the perception that PYD is more important than the relation with Ankara, and this is creating a frustration.
Nicholas Danforth in Washington, D.C. Osman asked a very important question there. What does the American administration want?
Right, and if people in Turkey are frustrated by the incoherent and mixed messages coming from this administration, people in Washington are even more frustrated. You've seen no end of lawmakers, both the Democratic and Republican Party, not to mention other people in the city, enormously frustrated with the way this decision has been managed and rolled out. Whether you think the United States should stay in Syria, whether you think the United States should leave Syria, the incredibly chaotic and irresponsible way that this decision has been handled is almost guaranteed to secure the worst possible outcome.
President Erdogan, Nicholas, has come out pretty strongly against John Bolton, who was visiting Ankara on Tuesday. But reading his op-ed in the New York Times, it feels like he thinks he can still appeal directly to Donald Trump and bypass the rest of his administration officials like John Bolton. Can he do that? Do you think he can get Trump back onto his page?
Well, and this is what's so confusing. I mean, right, initially it seemed like he'd had a remarkable success in doing just that, in bypassing U.S. administration officials who wanted a long-term presence in Syria, and convincing President Trump that the easiest solution would simply be to withdraw U.S. forces. Now, part of the complication is that in order to convince Trump of that, Erdogan seems to have promised, as he suggested in his op-ed, that Turkey would be able to stabilize the region and would continue the fight against ISIS. Subsequently, I suspect Trump has been informed by many people in Washington, many people in his own administration and in the military, that this will not be possible, that Turkey will not be able to live up to the promises that Erdogan made him. How Trump responds to this, that remains a mystery.
Right. Marwan, Kabalan, let's bring you into the conversation. Your thoughts on the developments in these last few hours. John Bolton had been seeking reassurances that Turkey will not target the Kurds once U.S. troops pulled out of northern Syria. Was this a doomed mission from the outset for John Bolton?
Absolutely. I think the Turks will not accept that because this is perhaps the major concern for the Turkish government, that they want actually to get in Syria in order to eliminate the YPG, because they consider the YPG as the Syrian branch of the PKK, which is considered by Turkey as a terrorist organization. This is the whole issue that is really Turkey concerned about in Syria. So when Mr. Bolton actually comes and say that we want Turkey to protect the very enemy that is trying actually to destroy, this is a very, I mean, it seems to me the very strange argument. But so now the issue is, in fact, if the United States is really going to withdraw, and this is something, and this is a very big if right now, because as your guests have just suggested, we don't really know what the real policy of the Trump administration. They don't speak with one voice. I mean, so, but if they decide actually to withdraw, we need to know, in fact, that when and how and who's going to replace the United States, because there is going to be a vacuum in Syria if the United States withdraw. And actually, we don't know which party the United States would want actually to replace it. Would that be Turkey? But if Turkey is going to replace it, then can the United States get guarantees from Turkey that they will not be trying to eliminate the YPG? If it's not Turkey, will Turkey, Iran, and Russia allow other parties? Because we hear now that the Americans are trying actually to have some sort of regional arrangement for the replacement of its forces in Syria, and that might include Arab military force. We don't know if that's going to be a possibility actually within this context.
Osman, I see you wanted to jump in there when Marwan was talking.
Something about, you know, Mr. Kabalan's, it's very a legitimate question, what will happen to PYD forces over that, but we have Afrin in our hand as a case study, okay? The YPG was controlling the region, and Turkish forces entered there, just give a fight with YPG and with the FSA, Free Syrian Army, and the local forces, and now they left the region. And then with the Kurdish participation in the local authorities, about 1 million Kurds are living there. And that's why we have already a model how to govern this region if PYD forces just withdrawn from there, okay? They shouldn't leave over there. They shouldn't left over there.
I wasn't talking about the Kurds. I was talking about the militia, the YPG, about Turkish position from the YPG, because I was saying that Turkey actually considered the YPG as a terrorist organization. So hence Turkey's position on the
right.
YPG.
Just I'm contributing what you are telling.
Yeah, but Osman, let me just jump in and ask you this.
It's not a contradiction.
Osman, let me ask you about a point the president made in the New York Times opinion piece. President Erdogan said that part of his strategy would be to create a stabilization force that would include fighters from all parts of Syrian society. That would mean also the Kurds then in that case, wouldn't it?
Yes, of course, the Kurds should be there as well. Just I may contribute to Mr. Danforth's comments about the article in New York Times. The New York Times article's target, from my point of view, is the American public. Mr. President Erdogan is trying to keep the American public in the game. First, just supporting Trump's decision for withdrawal. Second, he is telling that we have the common enemy, common threat, which is ISIS, which is important for the American, the military, the American public, and that's why he wants to pull these actors to the game. And secondly, we don't have any problem with the Syrian Kurds. We should define who is Syrian Kurds in the region. It is so important.
At this point, if I just may remind our viewers of what the issue we're talking about is precisely the Kurds of Syria. We've heard a lot about the Kurds, so let's take a closer look at this group. They're the largest ethnic minority in Syria, making up Between 7 and 10% of the population. They control almost 30% of the country, but mainly in the northeast and near the Turkish border. Kurdish fighters have been integral in the fight against ISIL. In 2015, they were backed by a US-led coalition to fight the armed group. But Turkey, as we've heard, sees them as a threat. It has fought Kurdish separatists for 40 years and wants to prevent them forming an autonomous region on its border with Syria. Well, Al Jazeera's Sinem Kosoglu has more on that now from Dadat in northern Syria.
We are a few hundred meters away from Dadat, close to Manbij city, which is under control of the Syrian Democratic Forces that is dominated by the Syrian Kurdish fighters YPG. And where we stand is actually like a buffer zone between the FSA-controlled area and the PYD-controlled area. It is just maybe 50 meters of distance, and the US military base is close to here. The Turkish military base is also very close to here. It is at the same time where the tension is, but also it is a safe place because this FSA and the PYD try not to interfere to each other, because the road behind me is dedicated to the humanitarian aid transportation according to both sides. But of course there is tension. Some of the Arabs accuse the Kurdish fighters, the YPG, for killing their families out there. And on the other hand, some of the Kurds say that they are very afraid because Turkey is planning a military offensive to their region. But on the other hand, there are some Kurds who say that the PYD or YPG is not a group that could represent their rights, because the YPG and PYD are suppressing their Kurdish people in the areas that is under their control. But of course, as the political uncertainty continues, the uncertainty in the field continues as well.
All right, as you heard there, Nicholas, uncertainty on the ground as well in northern Syria. How vulnerable do you think the Kurds will be once the US withdraws, if the US was to withdraw? And can they count from support elsewhere, from Damascus or from Moscow even?
Exactly. And that, as much as I think people on the ground, the Kurds on the ground, were shocked by the speed and the suddenness of the U.S. announcement, there was, given the Kurds' previous experience with the United States, a certain suspicion about the United States' long-term intentions and a certain recognition that eventually the United States would leave. And because of that, the YPG has stayed on good terms with the Assad government. And there was an expectation that if the United States were to leave, they would prefer to have the Assad government come back than to face a Turkish invasion. And so given that the United States has said it's going to leave, and I think given now, no matter what the United States says, because there is a sense that one way or another the United States is going to be taking off, they're going to try to reach an agreement with the Assad government, with Moscow's backing, to make sure that while this is not their first choice, it's still something they prefer to a Turkish invasion. And that could well be what we see going forward.
Marwan, Kabalan, your thoughts. If the United States leave, who fills the void?
Well, it depends on how the United States will leave, actually, because if there is an agreement with Turkey, which is something that I believe now is not actually something that we should expect to have soon, given the failure of the Bolton visit to Ankara today. So we still need to see actually who's going to take advantage of this agreement between Turkey and the United States. Now, it seems to me that we are back to square one between Turkey and the United States concerning the area. But let's assume that the Americans are withdrawing without an agreement with Turkey. That will put Turkey in a very difficult position vis-a-vis the Russians, the Iranians, and the Syrian regime. So I think these parties also are watching closely the negotiations between the United States and Turkey. So if these negotiations fail to produce the desired end for Turkey, they will take advantage most probably of this confusion, of this chaos, because we have seen, as Nicholas said, the YPG is trying actually to bring in the Syrian regime. We have seen that in Manbij last week when they invited the Syrian regime forces to enter the city. So that will make, in my opinion, the scene even much more complicated complicated and much more dangerous for everybody. So we still need to see actually how the Americans are going to handle this messy situation.
Okay, Osman, in Istanbul, Marwan says we're back to square one. Your thoughts on this? Do you think an agreement with Turkey is still possible, between the United States and Turkey is still possible? Can Trump and Erdogan come up with an agreement, a new agreement, a long-term plan for the stabilization of Syria?
Yes, I truly believe that there is still some common ground between the Americans and the Turks, because if regime comes to the region, it means that Iran will be dominating the region. I don't think that Washington, and especially the previous, they are already just renewing their strategies on Syria, but the previous strategy was containing Iran. And if they let PYD engage with regime, it will mean that the Iran will be coming to the region and it will have the upper hand. That's why I think still Turkey and Americans will have a common ground. Just I want to add one more thing regarding, I understand what Nicholas has said regarding some Kurds concerns about the Turkish penetration to the region. But if you look at what the regime is doing over there with barrel bombs, with chemical weapons, and it is being called as the regime's control. But when Turkey is entering into the region, it is bringing, the hospitals and the social, social services over there, and it is being labeled as Turkish invasion. I don't share this idea.
Oh, Nicholas, your response to that?
No, look, I'm clearly not here to defend the Assad regime. I think people in Turkey should ask why it is that so many Kurds living in Syria would prefer the regime to return than Turkish forces. That seems like a damning indictment of Turkey's behavior and how it's administered regions like Afrin after it's taken them over.
Yeah, coming back to the issue of Iran, because it's interesting. Key figures within the Trump administration, including Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, and John Bolton, have argued that U.S. involvement in Syria is not just aimed at defeating ISIL, but countering Iran's influence. Does Donald Trump, Nicholas, hear and understand that message?
That, again, as I said, is the big mystery. The United States had a strategy supposedly for containing Iran in the region. People like Bolton were saying that the U.S. presence in Syria was going to be a centerpiece of that strategy. Many of us didn't entirely understand how that was going to work, how 2,000 U.S. forces in Syria were going to single-handedly contain Iran. But we're even more confused how, with the United States withdrawing from Syria, we're going to continue to contain Iran. I do think you see a split now in the U.S. government between people who think that Turkey taking over the region would be better than Assad taking over the region to contain Iran. But you also see people who think that if the United States is going to leave and the YPG wants Assad back, that's what we should do.
All right. Marwan, Kabalan here in Doha. They're trying to find a solution, of course, for one part of Syria right now, the Turks and the Americans. But what about the rest of Syria, the conflict in the rest of Syria?
Exactly. The question of the withdrawal, of the absence of or the presence of the U.S. forces in Syria is not only about ISIS, it's not only about Iran, although, these two key factors are very important for U.S. policy and U.S. strategy in the region, but it's also about finding a political solution to the conflict in Syria. Rex Tillerson, the former Secretary of State, he put what most people actually believe as the most comprehensive, clear U.S. Syria policy last year, in January last year, during his famous speech before the Hoover Institution in Stanford University, when he actually identified three key objectives of U.S. policy actually in Syria and why the United States should actually stay in Syria with its military presence. Number one is preventing ISIL from coming back. Number two is preventing Iran from having a land corridor from Iraq through Syria to Lebanon, i.e. containing Iranian influence in the region. And number three is using the U.S. military presence in Syria as a bargaining chip in order to force the regime to accept the sort of political solution that would end actually the 8 years conflict now in Syria.
Right.
With the withdrawal of the U.S. forces now, with the decision of the withdrawal of the U.S. forces now, we really have key questions about whether the United States is really about any of these objectives.
Osman, I'll give you the last word in Istanbul. The conflict in the rest of Syria is undecided, of course, in terms of the political outcome. Obviously, militarily, the Assad regime has the momentum right now. How do you see the situation evolving, and what role for Turkey in this post-conflict Syria?
Generally, the discussion is just rolling around who have lost in Syria. It is obvious nobody won in Syria. Neither the Assad regime, neither nor the Russians, nor the Iranians, even to an extent, nor the Turks exactly, because the Assad is still staying over there.
The Syrians lost. It's only the Syrians who lost in Syria.
Yes, exactly. You're right. Exactly, you're right. Exactly, Syrians lost. They are, the very, very sad thing, and everybody is sitting and talking about the future of Syria without Syrians. This is so sad about it. It's so pity for the Syrians. But for the future, the American administration's withdrawal decision is making the issue much more complex. Before this decision, relatively there will be a stable situation. Assad was just secured the region. Turkey secured his own concerns, and Russia was there. Iran was there. The American was sitting there, and there may be a solution. But now a new, question mark is starting right now.
No solution in the immediate future. Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion, gentlemen. Osman, Sert, Nicholas, Danforth, and Marwan Kabalan. Thank you all. And thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. You can always watch the program again anytime on our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team, thank you for watching. Bye for now.